Space exploration is becoming one of the hottest sectors in the world right now. Innovations from privately held companies are causing this drive into space to be called the new gold rush. Today we'll look at some of the ways these companies are trying to make money in space and see if we can decide which of them represents the best opportunity to us as investors in the short to medium term. Let's go. We are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. I wonder what Oscar would have thought if he knew that 100 short years later we wouldn't just be looking at the stars, we would own them.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
One giant leap for mankind.
Okay, so we might be a little way off owning the stars, but you need to give me a little room here for some creative license.
Entertainers like to seem complicated.
And what I'm actually saying isn't that far off. In 2015, President Barack Obama
Greetings, Massive!
signed into power something called the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act, often referred to as the Spurring Private Aerospace Competitiveness and Entrepreneurship Act of 2015, or SPACE for short. The clue's in the name: spurring private aerospace competitiveness. The Act's aim was to encourage private companies to explore the idea of making money in space. It did this by allowing US citizens and industries to engage in the commercial exploration and exploitation of space's resources, including both water and minerals. This is literally an example of finders keepers, losers weepers written into law. Reassuringly, it does say that you can't exploit anything that's alive that you find. But honestly, I don't trust Jeff.
My name is Jeff.
If he finds aliens, you best believe in no time he will have them on 0-hour contracts working through the night in an intergalactic Amazon Prime distribution centre, sending people disappointingly small items at a reasonable price. Anyway, I digress. The S in space stands for spur, and spur it did. Like an intergalactic game of supermarket sweep, the Act has pushed the race for space right into the hands of private companies and thus again into the public eye. But guess what? Space isn't that new, and neither is the human desire to profit from it. The empty vacuum of space is littered with companies that tried reaching for the stars and ended up face down in the gutter. So what makes this time different? Is this time the
Democratization of space.
Is this race for space one we should be watching? Better yet, is it one we should be running ourselves? Or is it just another example of the human's ingrained desire to explore leading us to once again being infatuated with the final frontier? Well, if you believe the headlines, then space is going to be kind of a big deal. Morgan Stanley think the sector will exceed $1 trillion in revenue by 2040. Bank of America raised this by saying $1 trillion in the next 10 years. The UK government recently published a report stating the importance of this growing space to the UK market. Any way you slice it, the people in the know think space will become more and more important as time goes on, and that makes sense. So let's explore some of the most widely cited ways to make an absolute fortune in space and see which ones as investors we should be getting excited about right now. Option 1. There is a story everyone loves to quote about a guy named Samuel Brannan, who made a fortune selling pickaxes and pans during the California gold rush. As everyone's focus was on the gold itself, Brannan became the first gold rush millionaire by selling the supplies to mine that gold. I actually think a better story that no one ever tells is the one of Levi Strauss, who at the time had just invented a new type of hard-wearing blue work pant that he sold to the miners en masse. We now know those today as jeans, and Levi's, well, the rest is history. I got a pair of 502s on right now. When it comes to the space rush, we have a certain narrative that circulates online that mirrors the gold rush almost identically. If I asked you what the biggest opportunity was to make money in space right now, what would your answer be?
Mining. Mining in space.
Mining an asteroid.
As he increased NASA's budget for the year, Texas Senator Ted Cruz said in 2018 that the first trillionaire would be made in space. And in the context of the Space Act of 2015, he likely meant from mining. I've seen creators quote the fact that certain asteroids have quintillions of dollars in precious metals on them. And that is completely true, but in reality, we're still a ways off being able to mine asteroids, let alone bring the minerals and material back into our atmosphere and down to Earth so we can use it. Millions of tons of minerals mined from asteroids falling to the Earth sounds perfectly safe. At the end of the day, I'm no scientist and I'm not fully up to speed on the developments in the place, so you probably shouldn't listen to me. In the same way, I'm also not a financial advisor, so you definitely shouldn't be listening to everything I say today. It's just oversimplified opinions and poor humour. Kurt Sagast, or In a Nutshell, did a great video on this concept and how it could be achieved. I will link it below. And with all their fancy cartoons and animations, it seems pretty simple. But interestingly, under Trump's presidency,
He's a bad guy.
NASA shelved its own drive into this space by scrapping its ARM, or ARM program, which planned to bring an asteroid nearer to Earth for experimentation and mining. That could be a nod to how difficult and non-economical this process is as it currently stands. I'm not going to lie, I'm slightly relieved. I spent my whole childhood watching movies that told me asteroids near Earth is bad. The idea of Donald Trump's America parking an asteroid just off the coast of Earth terrifies me. I honestly think the over-romanticised notion of mining asteroids has been lodged in our brain by Bruce Willis.
This was a real good idea.
I do think it will happen at some point, but as normal human beings with our butts in the gutter looking up at the stars, we can't even invest in these businesses anyway. And there's probably a really good reason for this. Elon cites that SpaceX remains privately owned due to the fact that being on the stock market adds a level of pressure to a business that it doesn't have when it's private. What is that pressure? Simple: to make money. Elon knows that SpaceX is expensive and has a long way to go before it's delivering massive profits. SpaceX's valuation of 100 billion is based on the funding rounds, i.e. the money that Elon has collected off people to keep the company going. Jeff Bezos funds Blue Origins through the sale of Amazon shares. I do think mining will happen one day, and when it does, I think it will be game changing. But ahead of that, I think there's a lot of money to be spent and a lot more time before we get there. The second most touted option for profit in space is tourism. I think if we all look back and are honest with ourselves, as kids, most of us would have said we would have liked to have gone to space. So given the financial means now, if you had that money spare and your life was sorted, would you spend 250 grand to go on a Virgin Galactic flight? There are around 52 million millionaires on the planet. If 1 in 1,000 of those decided to take the trip, you'd be looking at a revenue of about $13 billion. I doubt people will go twice, and I actually think that 1 in 1,000 millionaires booking a ticket is very racy, considering anyone who owns a property inside the M25 is likely a millionaire nowadays. Doesn't mean they have 250 bags sat there in tendies just to slap down on a Virgin Galactic flight. I think Richard and Jeff really have a bigger target in their sights here, basically planes, which have an annual value to the global economy of around $686 billion. Far more exciting. And in order to understand the potential growth that could be ahead for a company like Virgin Galactic, all we need to do is study the aviation industry and the history behind that. When it first started, the idea of travelling on a plane was a novelty, and an expensive one at that. The first commercial flight took off on January 1st, 1914, and lasted a total of 23 minutes, doing a quick loop at Tampa Bay. The experience here was the flight itself, not the destination. Very similar to what Virgin Galactic is going to offer initially also. A flight experience to the edge of space. No destination, you end up right back where you started. Aviation and planes really changed the world when the novelty of the flight wore off, and instead they became a means of transport to get from one destination to another. The opportunity for space travel is to offer a quicker point-to-point solution than a plane currently does. If space travel and the cost of getting people into the atmosphere continues to fall, then the opportunity for the likes of Virgin Galactic, Blue Origin and Elon are huge. UBS estimates that there are more than 150 million passengers a year that fly routes longer than 10 hours. If we assume that 5% of those flights in the future are serviced by space at $2,500 per trip, the revenue opportunity as of today will be more than 20 billion per year. 7 billion more than the revenue that could be generated if 1 in 1,000 millionaires decided to take a loop at Tampa Bay. But that does not mean I think we should all flood into Virgin Galactic. First of all, there's a long way to go before what I even said actually happens. Virgin Galactic still aren't taking customers on the loop yet, let alone moving people across the world. Secondly, Virgin Galactic came to the market under a reverse merger called a SPAC, which are slightly controversial in their ways. Also as well, add to the fact that it's a short squeeze target for the Wall Street bets guys, and there's just loads of hype around any kind of space stock. Means predicting what Virgin Galactic will do in the coming weeks or months is next to impossible. Honestly, wild ride of a share. Matt Kennedy of Renaissance Capital told CNBC that much of the excitement around Richard Branson's venture was because it was the first publicly traded space tourism company available. There is literally a lack of space businesses that we can easily invest in, and that means that any that we can generate a whole load of hype. This is why Cathy Wood's space ETF was ridiculed on launch.
It's ridiculous. But there aren't enough genuine space-related stocks to make a decent ETF, and the manager wants to collect that 0.75% expense ratio. Maybe, I have an idea. Don't launch a space ETF if you have to pad it out with Netflix and Deere.
But in reality, there's just such a lack of available businesses that are purely space-focused that investing in space might not be what we imagined. So is anyone making money in space, or is it all just fantasies and dreams? Sharon Secoshia, Chief Investment Officer at Boston Private, told CNBC that she recognises the space industry is largely government-driven at the moment. We all know government programmes like NASA and the influence they've had on space exploration and also our popular culture. But what most people don't realise is NASA actually didn't build rockets like the Saturn V5. Boeing did, and that continues to this day. Boeing is developing a capsule to fly NASA astronauts to the space station. Boeing will get $4.2 billion from NASA to build this spacecraft. NASA has long relied on companies to do the heavy lifting when it comes to space. Boeing, Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman are all massive defence companies available to buy on the stock market who have a direct impact and influence over space exploration. So if you want that exposure, you could just buy one of these. But in 2020, NASA spent around $18 billion on private company assistance in space, spread across a number of different suppliers. Boeing alone revenued around $80 billion that year. These companies don't even break down the revenue they generate from space on their accounts. They just group it under defence or something. They're just simply so big that the revenue from space that NASA provides to them is really quite small to them. Now this might change in the future. As space becomes a bigger deal, these companies could grow and that influence from space could grow with them. But if you want to invest in one of these companies as a pure space play, it's simply not that. The fortunes of these businesses will be more dictated by what's happening on the ground. So get back in the gutter, mate. So with the options for pure space investments being limited to a handful of companies, and the people who are making money in the space are giant businesses where the revenue really doesn't even touch the sides. So if we want to take advantage of space, where do we go? Who is selling the pickaxes? Who in the short to medium term is going to capitalise on this growth in space? If we go back to the Morgan Stanley report, they put together a nice little pie graph that demonstrates where they think the money will sit. Mining doesn't even feature, unless it's under other, and the prediction is dominated by a very generalised internet. So here comes the boring answer we've all been waiting for. While the idea of Bruce Willis and the boys creating an infinite money glitch by mining a rock in space like imps on a gem seam in Dungeon Keeper is appealing, shout out to anyone who knows what that means. In reality, the exploration of space and the impact that that's going to have to us as investors and where we should be focusing short to medium term is a lot more focused on the impact it will have on individuals on the ground. Around 3.67 billion people on the planet do not have access to the internet. 77 million Americans alone are described as having inadequate internet connections. Add to this the fact that data usage year on year is skyrocketing, and you see how improved satellites and projects like Starlink, which plan to deliver cheap internet to all corners of the globe, present a real opportunity to us as investors. All you need to really be asking yourself is, who is going to benefit from 3 to 4 billion extra people coming online? When you realise Facebook, Amazon, Google and all the services we see as essential to life still have about 50% of the world to conquer, you realise the scope of this potential. This is why Morgan Stanley's list of 20 businesses they feel will benefit the most out of the space race is dominated by internet-based, well-established companies. They are poised to benefit from the space race in the form of improved communications. Let's stop fantasising about mining asteroids and instead look at this graph showing the increase in the amount of satellites being shot into space year on year. This is the real gold rush. This is where the opportunity is right now. The romanticisation of space and our desire to explore it is just ingrained in us. It is the same human desire that pushed us to explore our own world in search of riches. But we're in danger of getting ahead of ourselves here. It took 18 years for Elon's SpaceX to get astronauts onto the space station. 18 years. Matthew Weinzierl, in his paper Space, the Final Economic Frontiers, said, "It's easy for the exciting stories to get told without the caveat that this is super hard. It takes a long time and there is a lot of uncertainty."
Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Step back from the romanticised notion of splitting asteroids in half with nuclear bombs while Aerosmith plays in the background. And instead, let's look at the real-world ramifications of all the extra satellites we're putting in the sky. How that's going to improve communications around the world, bringing billions of people online, and the impact that will have on businesses that are already well established in that space and have a proven track record for delivering products and services that people like. Because in this intergalactic space race where we picture people on Mars and miners with lightsabers instead of pickaxes, best believe I'm going to be the guy with a solid internet connection and a spare set of AA.